As the proud creator of the Bumbleby movie and Bumbleby 2, Age of Ultron, I have received many comments over the years referring to Bumbleby as forced or only happened because the fans demanded it, and I have had to remove many comments as such as they were being quite rude. But this often raises the question, was Bumbleby forced? Was it always planned from the beginning? Was it just a ploy to appease the woke mob? Well, I thought today I would sit down and discuss this. And it's funny because there's two fandoms that I'm a part of that have as much of this types of infighting, and that is the RWBY fandom and the Star Wars fandom. It's also funny because Star Wars actually shares similarities with this issue, because the theme of pretty much the entire saga of Star Wars, or at least the prequel era, is that one galactic community is taken down by infighting. Because you see, at the beginning of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, the Republic has established taxes on trade routes. So, in protest of these taxes, the Trade Federation actually sends battleships to Naboo, and they halt all trade to Naboo, and they demand that these taxes be removed. Then they send droid armies down to Naboo, and it's this whole violent protest. So the Republic, in response to this, sends two Jedi to negotiate with the Trade Federation aboard their battleships. The Jedi, Qui-Gon Jinn, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. And this is Obi-Wan when he was younger. He was a Padawan, you see. This is the old days. So they go to the Trade Federation ships to negotiate. They sit down at the table, and then they try to poison them with gas and such. And it was a trap. They leave the room to find themselves blocked in by battle droids, and the battle droids, they open fire and they're under attack, and they have to defend themselves with their lightsabers. Lightsabers are their weapon of choice. They're created using kyber crystals. They're crystals imbued by the Force, found on the planet Ilum, and they fight their way free at the battleships and make their way down to the surface on the planet of Naboo. They need to reach the Queen, who is the one being blocked in by this protest of the Trade Federation, and to get to the Queen, they have to cross the ocean. On their way to the ocean, they run into a Gungan named Jar Jar Binks. Gungans are water-dwelling, sentient humanoid creatures with frog-like faces, so I guess not too humanoid. He leads them to their Gungan community, and through the Gungan community, they find this underwater transport. So they get in the underwater transport, they come across a big fish, another big fish, and an even bigger fish, and then they reach the city of Naboo, and they find the Queen being held captive by the battle droids. So they kill the battle droids, and they free the Queen, and her people, and her handmaidens, and her guards, and they flee aboard the Queen's ship. And to escape, because their ship has been damaged, they have to land on the desert planet of Tatooine. When they land on Tatooine, the Queen demands to come along as they go into the town of Mos Eisley. So they disguise her as just a regular Joe, and they head into town to find parts for the ship. To find parts for the ship, they head into this shop that's owned by a Toydarian named Watto. These flying short elephant creatures with wings, and definitely an offensive Jewish stereotype, at least this character is, and he has slaves. And this little slave boy named Anakin Skywalker is tending to the shop, and the Toydarian doesn't sell them the ship part because he's greedy and he wants more money. They don't have that much money. So they talk to the slave boy, and the slave boy's like, I can help you out with that, come with me. And they go to the boy's house, and the mom, was also a slave, makes them lunch or dinner, whatever the meal is. And they come to find that little Skywalker is into pod racing. It's this race that people bet on. It's like sports betting, and they make a deal with Watto that if Skywalker wins the race, they can get the ship part that they need. But they also make a deal to take the boy with them. They couldn't take the mother also. They had to settle on the boy. And Qui-Gon Jinn senses the Force in this boy, senses strong Force in the boy, so he believes that he has a destiny to become a Jedi. So they enter him into the race. He fixes up this crappy pod racer, but he makes it all brand shiny and new, he does the race. There's a bunch of racers, and they're all crashing and dying and killing each other. And there's Tusken Raiders, the Sand People, and they are like watching them. And I don't know, I can't remember if they're attacking anybody, but they're there. And a bunch of people die in the race. And then just by the skin of his teeth, Anakin beats his nemesis Bulba. And he wins the race. So they take Anakin, and they take the ship part they need, and they go back to the ship. On the way back to the ship, they're attacked by a mysterious assailant who has a red lightsaber on both ends of the blade. He has a double-bladed lightsaber, and he's red and has spikes, and his name is Darth Maul, but they don't know that yet. And I actually don't even know if they ever know that in this movie, what his name is, but that's his name, Darth Maul. And he attacks them, and the battle is very short-lived because they hop into the ship, and then they get away, and Darth Maul is just standing there like, fuck. So they make it back to the capital planet of the Republic, Coruscant, and they take the Queen to see Senator Palpatine. And Palpatine says, well, you know, if you want the situation taken care of and you want help for your planet of Naboo, then you should do a vote of no confidence on the Chancellor of the Republic, Valorum. And they do that, and he's basically ousted, and Palpatine uses his influence to get himself support to become the candidate to replace the Chancellor. So he himself becomes Chancellor. And once he's Chancellor, he gets Padme support for her planet of Naboo, which she's the queen of, and they go back to Naboo, and they speak to the Gungans, and they're like, because the Gungans and the people of Naboo have had their differences, they've had conflict with each other, but they come together, and they're like, look, we can all defend your planet if we all work together. And they're like, okay. He goes, blah, 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 as an agreement. That's the way he agrees. It's very strange, but if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. And then they go back to the city where they're being held by the droid forces, by the Trade Federation, and they attack the droid forces, and they free the city. But then, in the final hour, Darth Maul shows up, and oh boy, the music plays, and it is crazy, and Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan fight Darth Maul in this crazy duel, and they're battling their way through hallways and corridors and stuff, and they reach this dead end, and Obi-Wan gets locked behind a shield, ray shield door thing, and it's just Qui-Gon fighting Darth Maul by himself, and he gets stabbed, and he dies, and Obi-Wan screams, and then he makes it through the thingy, and fights Darth Maul all by himself, and using his anger and smarts, he bests Darth Maul, cutting him in half and sending him toppling down some kind of chute. He runs up to his master, and his master's dying words is to train young Skywalker as his own Padawan, and Obi-Wan becomes Anakin's master. And then the episode ends, and in episode 2, we jump forward, I don't know how many years exactly, but it's a lot, because Anakin is now like a young adult, or like an older teenager, somewhere in that range, and Obi-Wan has been his master, and they're really close with each other, but they also have kind of like a butting heads type situation, because Anakin's very stubborn, and he feels that he deserves more freedom than he gets, and they go to Coruscant because Padme went to Coruscant. The Republic is voting on a bill to create an army for the Republic. So Padme comes down to Coruscant, and as she's landing, her ship blows up in an assassination attempt, and a bunch of her people die, and it's very tragic. She wanted to vote against the bill to create an army because she's very anti-war. She's like a pro-peace movement type person. So clearly somebody who wanted the army to be made tried to silence her from voting against it. Obi-Wan and Anakin find out that the assassination attempt was carried out by a bounty hunter, who then hires another bounty hunter to kill Padme in her sleep later that night, which makes not much sense when you think about it too much, so let's just keep going. They track down the bounty hunter hired by the bounty hunter, they find her, but then she gets killed by the bounty hunter who hired her, and that bounty hunter, Jango Fett, flies away, and they're like, oh shoot. But then Obi-Wan realizes the dart that was used to kill the bounty hunter who was hired by the bounty hunter Jango Fett originates from a planet called Kamino, except the planet has been removed from the star charts. There's no records of its existence. So he goes to an old friend to find this out. He finds out where it's located. He goes off on his own to Kamino to find a facility of these long-necked having cloners. They can clone people. And when he arrives there, he finds out that there is an order ready to be picked up by the Jedi of a clone army. And he's like, nobody in the Jedi ordered this, what are you talking about? And they're like, yeah, huh, a Jedi named Sifo Dyas ordered the clones to be created. So he calls the Jedi Council, which is made up of, like, Yoda and Mace Windu and the like, and, there's other people like Kit Fisto, Ki-Adi-Mundi, Plo Koon, East Koth, bunch of people like that. And they're like, we had no idea about this order to create a clone army, but we are in need of an army, and the Senate is voting on this issue. Very peculiar. But Obi-Wan continues his search of the clone facility and finds out that the clones were cloned off of the bounty hunter Jango Fett. He had been hired to give his DNA to create this clone army. And he's like, well, that's weird. Can I go talk to him? So he goes to talk to him. And the door is answered by one of the clone children who Jango has named Boba. So this is a young Boba Fett. So Boba Fett's like, yep, my dad's here. And it takes him to see his dad. And Jango Fett's like, I'm just a simple man trying to make his way through the galaxy. Or something like that. And as soon as Obi-Wan leaves the room, he's like, pack your bags, kid. We're getting out of here. Because that's like his adopted son, basically. So they go to their ship, and Obi-Wan follows them out, and they start shooting at him, and Obi-Wan blocks it, and then he falls, and they fly away. So he gets in his ship, and he chases after them, because he's been tracking them. And they take him through an asteroid field, and there's a bunch of boom, boom, as he drops, like, these space mines, and he gets away. But he tracks him to the planet of Geonosis, and he tries to call for help, but he gets attacked once he lands. And the signal was picked up by Anakin, who has been looking after Padme, and they went to Naboo for, like, a little lovey-dovey vacation. But then they went to Tatooine because Anakin sensed that his mother was in trouble, and he hasn't seen her since he was a little boy. So they go to Tatooine to find his mother. They find out his mother was sold by Watto to the Lars family, and they go to the family homestead where they find C-3PO there. And he's like, oh, your mom has been taken, and shit. And she was taken by the Sand People. So he's like, oh, I'm gonna go find her. And he goes out into the wilderness of the desert and finds the Sand People village. And his mom is barely clinging to life. And, like, as soon as he gets here, she dies. So he goes all grrr, and he kills the entire village. Not just the men, but the women and the children too. He hates them. They're animals. He slaughtered them like animals. And Padme's like, I'm getting the ick. I'm getting the ick from this. But she has bad red flag detectors, so she doesn't really do anything with this information. And then they get the call from Obi-Wan, who landed on Geonosis, saying, help me, I'm under attack, help. And Anakin is like, I don't know if we should do that. And Padme's like, no balls. And he's like, okay, fine. So they go to Geonosis, and they enter what turns out to be a droid factory. The Separatists, oh my god, it's the Separatist movement who started with the Trade Federation, and the Trade Federation got a bunch of other plans to agree to succeed from the Republic. So they're building this droid army on the planet of Geonosis in this secret factory, and then all of a sudden they're under attack by these Geonosians, who are the natives of the planet Geonosis, and these bug creatures. So they start flying throughout the facility, and they are fighting for their lives, and Anakin actually, like, gets his hand crushed, and he's like, ouchie, ow, oof, ouchie, wouchie, and then they get captured, and Anakin and Padme are taken to an arena, and they're chained on these poles, and Obi-Wan is there too, and he's chained on a pole. He's like, a great job on the rescue, guys, and then Anakin says, fuck you, and then, they unleash these beasts in the arena, and there's like a whole bunch of Geonosians in the arena watching this as like a gladiator type situation, and Jango Fett is up there, and the leader of the whole operation, the leader of the Separatist movement, is Count Dooku. Now, Count Dooku was a Jedi. His master was Yoda, and he had been getting disillusioned with the Jedi during the events of Episode 1 and further back. And once he learned that his Padawan, who was Qui-Gon Jinn, died at the end of Episode 1, that was the final straw for him. He defected. He switched sides. So now he's the leader of the Separatist movement, with his master is like the secret Sith Lord, who they still don't know who he is yet, but he was the master of Darth Maul in the first movie. So now Count Dooku is his new apprentice, and he's leading the Sith army. Separatist army. And so he's doing this whole gladiator execution style thing, but they break free from their chains and they start fighting the creatures. But then as it seems like it's game over, a bunch of Jedi show up, and Mace Windu shows up with like a gazillion Jedi, and they all start fighting in the arena. They send in battle droids, and it's this whole clash, this whole big thing, and they're all fighting each other. And then it seems like it's over once again, and then a bunch of gunships come down, and it's Yoda, and he has the clone army. He went to Kamino to accept the order, so now they have the army. And they have this army because while all this was happening, meanwhile on the planet of Coruscant, Palpatine used the fear of this whole separatist movement to be granted emergency powers. So he made himself Chancellor, and now he has emergency powers. And he uses the emergency powers to demand the creation of a Republic army, which allowed them to use this clone army. So they skipped the vote, and he's like, yes, army time. And they get the clone army, and now it's a war. The Clone Wars, which is a whole other can of worms. Great show, but I'm not going to talk about it. So let's just focus on what's in the movies. So they battle out of the arena, and now the entire planet of Geonosis is this whole big battlefield, and they chase after Count Dooku, and they corner him, and they go to fight him. Anakin gets his ass kicked, and so does Obi-Wan, and then Yoda shows up, and he's like, I was your master, I'm gonna kick your ass. And then he jumps around, he does like these little bunny hops, and he's fighting, but he's like really good at it. So Dooku's like, oh shit, I gotta run. So he runs, and that's basically the end of the movie. Begun the Clone Wars have. And now there's another time jump in between episodes 2 and 3. There's been a huge long war between the Republic and the Separatist movement, and there's a droid general named General Grievous. General Grievous has, during the time jump, captured Chancellor Palpatine. So now Obi-Wan and Anakin are sent in to rescue the Chancellor in this big fleet of warships over the Republic capital of Coruscant. They invade the ship that Grievous is on, and they fight their way to rescue Palpatine, and they find him locked up in a chair, and then Dooku shows up, and he's like, your powers, or Anakin's like, my power has doubled since we last fought, Count. And Dooku's like, show me then. And then he shows him, and then he dies. He cuts off Dooku's head, because Palpatine's like, do it. And Dooku's like, why would you say that? And then he kills him. So they have Palpatine, but then they get captured again and taken to the bridge, where Grievous is like, take your lightsabers for my collection, because he has like 4 arms, and he takes their lightsabers, and then they fight them their way free, and they get their lightsabers back, and Grievous is like, fuck this, and then he breaks out the window, and he gets into an escape pod, and he's like, time to abandon ship, and he abandons ship, and the ship gets scuttled, and they're crashing to the surface, but they survive. Obi-Wan goes, another happy landing, and then they make it back to Coruscant, back to the Senate buildings and whatnot, and Padme is there waiting for Anakin, and she's like, I'm pregnant, and he's like, so then they discover that Grievous has escaped to the planet Utapau to meet with the surviving leaders of the Separatist movement. The war is winding down. It's almost over. It's been many years, but it's almost over. So Obi-Wan is sent to Utapau to find Grievous. Meanwhile, Anakin is granted a seat on the Jedi Council, but he is not made master. He's very pissy about this, and he talks to Palpatine. Now, Palpatine, off-screen, has been kind of mentoring Anakin, like serving as kind of a father figure, and he's all like, they just don't respect you, Anakin. They just don't respect you. They don't think you're ready for it. And he's like, you're right. And Palpatine's like, there are powers greater than the powers of a Jedi. And Anakin's like, huh? And then he realizes, wait a minute, powers greater than a Jedi? Are you a Sith? Are you the Sith? Are you the Sith Lord? Have you been the Sith Lord this whole time? And Palpatine's like, I don't know. And Anakin goes to Mace Windu with this information, and Mace Windu's like, okay, I'll go talk to this dude. And then he shows up with a few other Jedi, and they're like, you're under arrest, Chancellor. And the Chancellor's like, you've all fallen for my great master plot. You made me Chancellor. You gave me emergency powers. I am the Senate. And Mace Windu says, not yet. And they start fighting, and he kills the other 3 Jedi instantly. But Mace Windu is holding his ground, and he actually wins the lightsaber battle, and Palpatine is on his ass against the floor, and he's like, oh god, help me, somebody help me. So Anakin shows up, and because he's, been feeling like the Jedi don't respect him, and Mace Windu told him not to come, but he's like, screw that, I'm coming. So he comes, and he sees Mace Windu standing over Palpatine with a lightsaber, and he's like, I'm gonna kill this man, he's too dangerous to be left alive. And Anakin's like, no, he must live, he must stand trial. He doesn't actually care about standing trial, he just has an affinity for Palpatine, because Palpatine's been grooming him, basically, ever since he was a younger Jedi. And Palpatine's like, no, Anakin, don't let him kill me, don't let him kill me. And then right before Mace Windu can kill him, Anakin takes out his lightsaber and cuts off Mace Windu's hand, starts screaming, and then Palpatine throws him out the window. Anakin's like, oh my god, what have I done, what have I done? And Palpatine's like, yeah, you're Darth Vader now. Yeah, the Republic is over, let's take it over. The Jedi are corrupt, we must stop them. And meanwhile, Obi-Wan has made it to Utapau. He fought Grievous, General Kenobi, hello there. And then he kills Grievous, and then as this is happening, Palpatine calls the clones and says, execute Order 66. And all the clones betray the Jedi because they have chips in their brains, and the chips make it impossible to disobey this order. So the chips activate, they execute Order 66, which makes them execute all the Jedi. So Obi-Wan gets shot out of the fucking sky or whatever and falls into this body of water, and they think he's dead, but he's not, and he makes it off the planet Utapau. Meanwhile, Palpatine sends Anakin with the clone army to the Jedi Temple to exterminate all the Jedi, even the younglings. He slaughters a bunch of little kids. It's very tragic. Obi-Wan shows up and finds Yoda, and they're like, what? He's like, why did this happen? And Yoda's like, you don't want to know, buddy. And Obi-Wan's like, yes, I do. So then he finds out, and he's like, oh, I didn't want to know that. My Padawan has fallen to the dark side. And he's like, but I must stop him. So Obi-Wan goes to Padme's and is like, do you know where Anakin is? I kind of need to talk to this bozo. And she's like, nuh-uh. And he's like, you guys were lovers, weren't you? You're pregnant. And Padme's like, what has he done? So acting on her own accord, she flies out to see Anakin to try to talk some sense into him. And unbeknownst to her, Obi-Wan boards her ship. So she goes to see Anakin, they're talking, and she's like, Anakin, you're breaking my heart. You're going down a path I can't follow. And he's like all dark now, and he's like, if you're not with me, then you're my enemy. And then Obi-Wan shows up, and he's like, you betrayed me, you brought Obi-Wan to me. And she's like, no, I didn't know. And he starts choking her, and she falls unconscious. Obi-Wan's like, you've become evil, I must stop you. And meanwhile, Yoda shows up to Palpatine's Senate chambers, and it's like, you're taking over the Republic and creating an empire, no bueno. And he pulls out his lightsaber, and they fight each other, and they're like flying around the Senate chambers, and they're throwing shit at each other. And it's actually pretty evenly matched, but Yoda ends up having to retreat because he falls like a shit ton of stories, and he's all, ouchie, ouchie, I gotta go. But Palpatine was definitely on the ropes, so good for Yoda, I guess. And meanwhile, Obi-Wan and Anakin are battling on the planet of Mustafar, fighting over lava pits. And then eventually, Obi-Wan gets the high ground, and he says, it's over, I have the high ground. Anakin's like, doesn't matter, I still W this, and he jumps, and he gets his legs chopped, and he's like, ow, 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 and he starts burning, he's on fire. Obi-Wan's like, you are my brother, Anakin, I love you. And then he has to leave him as he's burning alive, thinking that he's killed Anakin. But then Palpatine shows up, as Anakin's barely clinging to life, hanging on to his hatred to sustain him. And then they put him in what would become the Darth Vader suit, and that's what is keeping him alive. And in his Darth Vader suit, he asks if Padme's still alive, and Palpatine says, in your anger, you killed her. And which in reality, she died during childbirth after the fact, because, I don't know, she lost her will to live, which is like the dumbest shit ever heard of all time. What do you mean she lost her will to live? That's not how you die, but whatever. She dies, and Palpatine says Anakin did it because of his choking, and he's like, no! So now he's like really evil, really messed up. He's basically Space Hitler now. And Palpatine's like, good, and they create the Empire, and they build the Death Star, which is this big space station designed to blow up planets that put up a resistance to their empire. So they've taken over the Republic from the inside and turned it into the Empire. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan and Yoda regroup, and they regroup with their allies, including Bail Organa, who is a senator who has sided with them and is going to basically establish what is the beginning of a resistance, which would be known as the Rebellion. He takes one of the two twins that Padme gave birth to, Leia. He adopts Leia, and she basically becomes a princess. I'm actually not sure how. Is Organa royalty? I guess that they would be, but how did she become prince? I don't actually know that part. It's whatever. The other twin, Luke, is given to the Lars family back on Tatooine, the one that married Anakin's mother before she was taken by Sand People. They take in Luke. He kind of gets the shittier end of this deal, having to live out in the desert while his sister is living as royalty. But the thinking is separate the two twins so that they're not found, and Obi-Wan stays in the desert to look after Luke. And then 19 years pass. It's episode 4 now into the original trilogy, and there's a whole plot in the movie called Rogue One, but long story short, a group of rebels sacrifice themselves to acquire the plans to the Death Star. They all die, but they get the plans to the ship that has Princess Leia, who is grown up now, about 19 years old, and she is like essentially the leader of the rebel movement, and she has the plans to the Death Star, but then she's getting captured, so she gives the plans to R2-D2. R2-D2 and C-3PO are sent down to Tatooine. They are wandering the desert. They have the plans. They get captured by Jawas, who like to scavenge droid parts and sell them, and as they're selling the droids off, now 19 years old, Luke Skywalker comes and tries to buy droids, and he's like, Uncle Owen, this droid has a bad motivator. And he's all like, I want to go to the Tashi station to pick up some power converters. He's a real whiny butthead. But he buys R2 and C-3PO. And when he takes them back to his home, R2 plays a message recorded by Princess Leia saying, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. And Luke is like, I wonder if she means Ben Kenobi, because Ben Kenobi is the name that he gave himself, like as kind of like an undercover name. And he's like, there's this old hermit who lives in the desert named Ben Kenobi. I wonder if she's talking about him. So R2 goes out to find Ben Kenobi, and he's old now, and he's like, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. I am old. Used to be a Jedi, like your father. But he does not tell Luke that his father became Darth Vader. He tells him that Vader killed his father, I guess wanting to spare him of the pain. So Luke is like, wow, my dad was a Jedi. That's crazy. Oh my goodness, I want to be a Jedi. Obi-Wan's like, okay, bet, have this lightsaber. This used to be your dad's lightsaber or something like that. I think it was his dad's lightsaber. And Obi-Wan's like, okay, well, then I need to go help these people who are asking for my help. So they go to the town of Mos Eisley because, before that, Luke's Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru get killed by stormtroopers, who are the soldiers of the Empire. So he's like, I need to stop the Empire. So they go to the town of Mos Eisley. We're back in this town once again. And they're looking for somebody to fly them off the planet so that they can go help the rebels and help free Princess Leia from the Empire. They come across a smuggler named Han Solo and his sidekick Chewbacca, a Wookiee. And Han Solo's like, I did the Kessel Run in 10 seconds flat. I'm the best ship pilot out there. It'll cost you, though. And they're like, deal. So they get on a ship, and they fly, and they go to the planet of Alderaan, which is where Princess Leia lives, and it's not there anymore because it got blown up by the Death Star. And they're like, that's no moon, that's a space station. And they get pulled into the Death Star, and they're like, oh crap. And there's a bunch of stormtroopers waiting for them, so they kill the stormtroopers. They take their outfits so that they look like stormtroopers themselves. They wander the halls of the Death Star looking for Princess Leia, and they find the cell block. So they get to the cell block, They open the cell to Princess Leia. They let her out of the cell. Han Solo's talking to somebody on the phone, and he's like, boring conversation anyway, and he shoots the console, so their cover has been blown, and then a bunch of stormtroopers show up, and Princess Leia grabs a gun, and is like, you boys are fucking useless, and she starts shooting the stormtroopers, and they're like, damn, she's a badass, and she leads the rescue from there, and they go into this junk pit, and with the walls closing in on them, and they're like, oh my god, we're gonna die, we're gonna get crushed by this fucking garbage disposal, and then R2 shuts it down from afar, and they're like, woohoo! So they get out, and they make it back to their ship, but as they're getting back to their ship and dodging gunfire all along the way, Luke sees Obi-Wan fighting Darth Vader, and Darth Vader kills Obi-Wan, his old master, and Luke's like, no, and Obi-Wan is like, blah, and then they fly away. Having escaped the Death Star, they report to the Rebel base on Yavin 4. They give the Death Star plans to the Rebel base. They launch an assault of spacecraft to blow up the Death Star, and Luke joins them, wanting to be a Rebel pilot. He jumps into one of the spaceships, and they all start zooming around the Death Star, and there's a big space battle, and they're pew pew pew, pew pew pew, and they're all blowing up and dying, but Luke makes it to the weak point of the Death Star, and he's about to fire, but he hears the voice of Obi-Wan's ghost say, use the Force. So he turns off his navigation computer and instead relies on the Force to guide his missile, and he fires, and it goes right down the weak point, and the Death Star blows up, and Darth Vader escapes on his ship, and he's like, blast those darn kids, I would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for them. And now we're into episode 5, where the rebels have moved to a hidden base on the planet Hoth, this big snow planet, and the rebels are like now in this giant war against the Empire. It's no longer just a resistance, it's a full-blown war now, and the Empire shows up, and they start attacking the base, and they're all like, oh, shite. So they fight back against these giant machines called walkers. They kind of look like giant camels, and it's this whole bloody battle, and Luke is like taking down the walkers, and they definitely lost the battle, and they have to retreat. So, but they get separated. Luke gets into a ship with R2 and flies off, and Han Solo, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, and 3PO get onto Han Solo's ship, and they take off. Now, unbeknownst to Luke, R2 is plotting a course to the planet Dagobah, because Obi-Wan's ghost told Luke to go see Yoda on Dagobah. And Luke's like, don't take us to Dagobah, I need to go be with my friends, or I need to be with my friends. And R2's like, shut up. And they go to Dagobah. It's this big swamp planet, and they find this little green creature who they think is just some random, but he's actually Yoda, and he's being a little silly because he's been a hermit in the swamps all these years. And he's like, I'm Yoda, I am. And he's like, oh, you're Yoda. And then he trains him in the Force. And he's like hopping around like a monkey, and he's climbing on Luke's back, and he's being all silly. But then he teaches him how to be a better Force user, and he teaches him to be a better Jedi, and Luke's like, I'm ready. Meanwhile, Han Solo, Princess Leia, Chewbacca, and 3PO go to planet Bespin. Bespin is basically run by an old friend of Han Solo named Lando Calrissian, so he goes there thinking it's a safe haven. Turns out, though, Lando Calrissian made a deal with the Empire to keep his planet safe, so waiting for them is Darth Vader. Han Solo tries to shoot Darth Vader, Darth Vader's like, nuh-uh, and he just blocks it with his hand like a badass, and they all get captured. And Lando starts feeling guilty for betraying his friend because he didn't realize how fucked up the situation was going to be, but it's too late, he already turned them in to the Empire. So, because there is a bounty out on Han Solo by the gangster Jabba the Hutt, Boba Fett, who is now grown up into a bounty hunter of his own, comes to collect the bounty on Han Solo. They freeze him in what's called carbonite. Leia confesses her love to Han Solo. Han Solo says, I know. And then he gets frozen. And then Boba Fett takes his frozen body to the gangster Jabba the Hutt. Meanwhile, the rest of them are being captured by the Empire, and Luke shows up having been trained now, and he runs into Darth Vader, and he's like, I'm gonna fight you, and they fight each other, and he's really put against the ropes. He's dangling off an edge, and he gets his hand cut off, And Vader is like, Obi-Wan never told you what happened to your father. And Luke is like, no, he told me you killed him. And he goes, no, I am your father. The line is not, Luke, I am your father. That's a very common misconception. He never says, Luke, I am your father. He says, no, I am your father. Anyway, Luke is like, no, that's not true. That's impossible. But Vader's like, it's true, dog. Join me and we will rule the galaxy as father and son. And Luke's like, fuck that. And he lets go and falls off the edge and just drops like a gazillion feet and somehow doesn't die just from impact on where he lands. Then he's dangling now above like an open sky, and he's like, if you fall he'll definitely die. But then the Han Solo ship flies up, being driven by his friend Lando. Lando has Leia and the rest of them, and he's like, I'm sorry for betraying you guys. Alright, and then he catches Luke in the ship, and they all fly away, and that's where the movie ends. It's a kind of a cliffhanger. But then the final movie, episode 6, another time skip. They send 3PO and R2 to the palace of Jabba the Hutt because they're trying to get Han Solo back, their old friend. And the droids are like, please? And Jabba's like, atuta, which means no. So the droids get captured. I mean, there's a lot of capturing going on in these fucking movies. And Luke is like, alright, time to stand on business. So he shows up, and earlier than that, Leia showed up, but she got captured too, and put in this skimpy slave outfit, which, I mean, I think that was just an excuse for George Lucas to put Carrie Fisher in a skimpy outfit. Really unnecessary, but I guess the gangster has, like, sex slaves, so, I mean, I guess logically it checks out. In the real world, a little weird, but we'll look past that. So now all of his friends have been captured, so Luke shows up, and he's like, give me my friends back. And Jabba's like, atuta, which means no. And he gets dropped into the Rancor pit, which is where Jabba keeps his monster under his palace. And Luke kills the monster, and Jabba's like, fuck. So they take him again, and they take him out into the desert, where there's a pit. And this pit has a monster mouth sticking out of it, and it's where they toss people into the pit. And everybody is out in the desert now, and Luke is like, watch this shit, and he jumps, like, to get to the pit, but then he does, like, a backflip, and R2 throws him his lightsaber. He catches his lightsaber, and he starts chopping people up, and Jabba's like, what the hell? And Luke frees all his friends, and Princess Leia takes the chains that she's chained up with and chokes Jabba to death, and Jabba's dead, and they free Han Solo, and they're all like, yippee yippee, so now everybody's free, and they go back to the rebel base, and they're like, okay, time to end this trilogy, let's defeat the Empire. They go to the forest moon of Endor, where there's some kind of Empire base. I don't remember the importance of the base exactly, but it has something to do with the Death Star. So because the Death Star has been rebuilt, I forgot to say. They've rebuilt the Death Star. In reality, I'm pretty sure George Lucas was out of ideas, and they just needed some kind of final rallying points, so the Empire rebuilt the Death Star. So they go to Endor to attack the base, and there's a bunch of little teddy bear creatures named Ewoks, and the Ewoks are like, and that means we will help you defeat the Empire. So the stormtroopers are on Endor, and they fight the stormtroopers with the help of the Ewok teddy bears, and it's this whole thing, this whole battle, and Luke is like, I forgot to say, Luke went to go see Yoda, and Yoda died of being old, and he's informed that Leia was his sister, so he tells Leia, you're my sister. And Leia's like, well, that's kind of weird, because I kind of, like, kissed you, like, a couple movies ago, and he's like, yeah, awkward, let's not talk about that, though, I'm gonna go face my father. So he leaves Endor, so while they're all fighting the stormtroopers with the Ewoks, he, is taken to Vader, and Vader takes him onto the Death Star, to be face-to-face with Emperor Palpatine. We have not seen Palpatine for a while, but Palpatine is there, and then Vader takes Luke to Palpatine, and he's like, young Skywalker, you little rascal, you've caused me a lot of trouble, but you can become my new apprentice. Vader is old news. Kill your dad and join me. And Luke is really angry with his dad, so he starts whacking him. But then his anger, he doesn't let his anger get the better of him. He's like, no, I'm a Jedi. I won't kill. And Vader is like, oh, thank you, dog. So then Palpatine's like, okay, bud, you're donezo. He starts shocking him with lightning out of his fingertips, and Luke's like, owie, ow, ow, ow. And Vader, watching his son being, like, burnt to a crisp, and he's like, no! So he grabs Palpatine and he throws him down a hole, and Palpatine's like, ah! And Palpatine dies, and he never returns. He never returns somehow. He's dead. So, meanwhile, there's ships flying around the Death Star, and they blow it up again. So Luke is taking his father off the Death Star, but his father is, like, dying because of all the lightning that was flying around, and it broke his suit, so now he can't breathe. And he takes the helmet off of him, and they look in each other's eyes, and he's like, thank you, Luke, for freeing me from the dark side. I am sorry. Bleh. And he's dead. And Luke goes back to Endor. The Death Star is destroyed. The Empire has been defeated. The Rebels have won. All the big evil space Hitlers are removed from power. And everybody in the whole galaxy is celebrating. No more evil dictatorship. And they're having a party with the Ewok teddy bears. And Luke looks over and he sees the Force ghosts of Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Anakin, his dad, except it's the ghost of Anakin before he became Darth Vader, because that was technically where Anakin died and became Darth Vader. So he sees his younger father, and they're like, good job, Luke, you've saved the galaxy, and you've avenged the fallen Jedi. And Luke is like, yay, thumbs up, and happy ending. And peace is brought to the galaxy, and no more evil, and they build a new republic, and democracy is back. Still corruption going on, but, you know, that's unavoidable when you're building democracy. There's always going to be corruption, but long story short, democracy prevails, evil has been removed, Bumbleby is not forced.